Dr. Cortez waited patiently for Desmond to arrive. She was to give him a tour of her facility and present her research to him for evaluation. This was all standard procedure, of course, but the process irritated her. She hated the idea of having to present her work to someone as beneath her as Desmond. But she would do it with a smile on her face if she was ever to get her hands on Desmond's research. Desmond was the first to study codename Forerunner's blood. He saw all of the potential that it had for human advancement. To him, it was a philosopher's stone, to be used to strengthen humanity. Cortez agreed with his ambitions for the most part. Desmond was the lead researcher of the Alpha Project, a project specifically made to find the full potential the Forerunner's blood could augment a subject. Cortez had already utilized small bits of the research Desmond had provided her, but she needed the rest if she was ever to start a new project. His research was crucial in advancing the potential and lethality of Cortez's virus. She called it the Plague. It was like nothing Cortez had ever developed before. She had used properties gathered from codename Forerunner to create a virus that would force evolution on anyone infected. If the subject showed signs of strength and endurance, then the plague would augment them in ways still not completely known. If the subject showed signs of weakness, then the plague would eat away at the subject until nothing remained. The world would be much more interesting for her that way. Cortez didn't have to wait long for her visitor. Desmond arrived moments before schedule. "Good afternoon, Jessica," Desmond said as he extended his hand to Cortez. "Good afternoon, Dr. Ashburn," she said as she shook his hand. "I hope your day has been going well." "It's been work-heavy, but satisfying. I've actually just finished writing the report on the Alpha Project." Cortez smiled. "I look forward to reading it. Now, if you'll follow me, we'll begin our tour. I have a full presentation ready for you. I'll explain all the research I've done up to this point and how I've implemented it." She began to walk to her lab, but stopped when she noticed that Desmond hadn't followed her. "Is something wrong?" Desmond looked away from Cortez as he spoke. "I'm sure you've worked very hard on your presentation, but I doubt it isn't anything I couldn't find on your reports. Reports which, I'll remind you, I've read extensively." Cortez was unprepared for Desmond's sudden difficulty. She had hated working with him, but that was because he would always work alongside her as a partner, instead of her subordinate. Truth be told, she preferred working with Desmond more than any other researcher because of how cooperative and useful he was. "Then, what is it you want me to show you?" Desmond cleared his throat. "I've come to understand that you've received the Alpha Project's incompatible subjects." Cortez couldn't help but smile. The phrase, incompatible subjects, was Desmond's softened description of the rejects of his project. "You want to see them?" Desmond nodded. "I'm curious as to what's become of them." "They were vital in the development of the plague. I'd be glad to show you." She began walking past her lab and to her personal containment area. Desmond followed close behind. The walk from Cortez's lab to her personal containment area was short and silent. Desmond seemed lost in thought. He didn't even notice when Cortez had stopped, until he was a few feet ahead of her. She reached into her pocket and retrieved her keycard. She held it up to the containment area's main door access panel. The panel buzzed to life, and the doors opened. "I think even you'll be impressed with what you'll see today." She smiled. Desmond smiled back, but his eyes betrayed a glimmer of uneasiness. He didn't seem as proud as she felt. Cortez led Desmond to a toughened glass container the size of a prison cell. Inside it were 3 completely motionless bodies. "These are some of the least compatible subjects," The Forerunner serum quickly burned away at the subject's body if they were not compatible, but my virus has a different effect. Instead of just burning away at the subject, it produces more plague and increases the spread. Desmond eyed Cortez as if he wanted to ask something but thought better of it. They don't look very different to the incompatible subjects we produced. She walked to the container and began tapping on the glass. Immediately afterward, the subjects sprang to life and began shambling their way towards her. She smiled as she watched them claw at the glass. She always thought it was amusing how the carriers always tried so hard to attack her through the reinforced glass. All of their efforts were in vain, of course. They weren't strong enough to break through it. Desmond and Cortez eyed the carriers. One of them looked like a middle-aged man with short brown hair. The right side of his face looked like it had been skinned. He watched us through his light blue left eye and his glazed-over right eye. The second subject was a woman in her early 20s, with green eyes and blonde hair. She still retained her beautiful, slender figure. She looked paler than she did in life, but other than that, and the lifeless stare she gave, she looked normal. The final subject was one that Cortez knew personally. He was one of Cortez's previous assistants that she had problems with. He was 28 years old, with dark brown eyes and long, dark brown hair. The lower left side of his face had faded away, giving him a seemingly permanent smirk. No other significant necrosis could be seen on the subject due to their clothes being intact. Desmond's eyes narrowed. He wore a hard, unreadable expression. "I am aware of how the plague creates these carriers," he said as firm as he could, but even through the tough facade, Cortez had heard his voice shake. "Is this all you have to show me?" "No, there is something else. The pinnacle of our observations and the main producers of the plague is what we both really want to see." Desmond nodded, and with that, they ventured further through the containment area. Cortez led Desmond past the other container cells and into an area filled with human-sized containers. There were many armed guards and scientists that she had personally picked herself, keeping watch of the area. The pair stopped right in front of one of the human-sized containers. Cortez used her access card on the container's panel and activated the container's open procedure. The container's cover slowly began to flip up. Desmond and Cortez stayed silent as the cover ascended. The only sound they could hear was the low, mechanical hum of the machine. Desmond slowly backed away as the container continued to open. He looked at the creature with a mixture of shock and concern on his face as more of it came into view. The cover finally reached the top, and the creature inside was revealed. It was tall, almost too tall to fit in the container. Its skin was a sickly white. Its body was slender, but slightly muscular, giving it an almost skeletal appearance. Its fingers were now long, skeletal claws. Its eyes were closed, so neither of the scientists could see its almost completely blank eyes. Cortez watched as the creature's chest slowly rose and fell. She placed her hand on it and smiled as she felt the creature's long breaths. She liked these subjects. They were far more interesting than the normal carriers. They were crucial in understanding how the plague worked. But that wasn't the reason she liked them so much. Cortez wasn't entirely sure why, but she felt attached to them. She had watched them grow from the weak, fragile prisoners Cortez had harvested into the predators they had become. She felt pride at what they became. the pride that a mother felt when her young had grown into something strong. Desmond cleared his throat. "What have you made?" he asked in disbelief. Cortez turned to him. "This is what our superiors wanted us to make. The subjects that couldn't fuse with the plague properly would be used as their private army." "Is this all that you have to show me?" Desmond sounded almost disgusted. Cortez's smile widened as she began to input more commands into the control panel. "No, you haven't even really seen what they're capable of. We will have to go to this room's surveillance area for proper demonstration." She finished inputting the commands and began making her way to the surveillance room. The room wasn't very large. There were surveillance monitors scattered across the left and right sides of the room. The back room led back out of Cortez's lab. The front faced the containment area with clear, reinforced glass acting as a barrier. The control panel faced the front. "These things are going to be militarized?" Desmond asked. "That's correct. They don't even look like they can fight. They're just walking corpses, the same as the rest." "Oh, I assure you they are much more than that." A loud alarm suddenly sounded in the containment area. Its long, high-pitched wails made it impossible to hear anything else. The surveillance room door suddenly shut in front of the scientists, making it possible to hear again. "What's going on?" Desmond asked anxiously. "Why is the alarm going off?" "There's a containment breach," she said calmly. "Look." She pointed to one of the monitors. Desmond looked up to see the subject they had monitored, now fully awake and tearing at his restraints. She smiled as it tore itself free from the wires and machines. Desmond and Cortez could see the features of its face now. Its eyes were as black as charcoal. Its mouth curled into a grin, revealing its long, jagged teeth. Its nostrils began to flare in ravenous anticipation. It was free. A group of 5 armed guards rushed to the creature. Their guns were already trained on it. The creature seemed to notice this. It stopped dead in its tracks and stood completely still. There was a brief pause as the men waited for it to react, but it didn't. The guards slowly began to edge closer to it. One of the guards grabbed a syringe full of a very strong sedative from his belt. He cautiously walked closer and closer until he was a few feet away from the creature. Cortez sighed in disappointment. She had expected the creature to do more. She expected it to put up a fight, but instead, it just stopped. She continued watching in hope that it would react. She disabled the alarm so she could hear the interaction as well. The creature took a long, deep breath and sprang to life. It grabbed the guard closest to it and used him as a shield against the others. The other guards began to shoot the creature, but most of the bullets hit the guard, and those that did hit the creature didn't seem to slow it down. It threw its makeshift shield towards the group and managed to knock 3 of the 4 down. With the other 3 guards momentarily incapacitated, it rushed for the 4th. It dashed to him with godlike speed. It lunged itself towards the guard and knocked him down to the floor. The creature easily tore through the guard's chest. The creature began to grab chunk after chunk of the guard's flesh and threw them carelessly away. It was senselessly mutilating him. Cortez was taken aback by the unnecessary gore she was watching. She had wanted her subject to become a ruthless hunter that she could use at her will, but the way he tore at the guard was more vicious than she had anticipated. She watched as the creature dug its hands into the guard and pulled apart its ribcage. The way it attacked almost made it seem like it had some kind of vendetta against the guards. The guards got back to their feet and began firing at the creature again. This time, it had nothing to protect itself with. It staggered backward from the gunfire and ran for the cover of a nearby container. It let out a large, high-pitched scream that caused the guards to stop their attack and cover their ears. They were disoriented. The creature took this opportunity to attack. It rushed towards the guards and immediately threw one towards one of the containers. It slammed the next guard onto the floor and grabbed the final one from his chest. The creature smiled again, intentionally showing all of its jagged teeth to the horrid guard. He squirmed frantically, trying to escape, but it wasn't enough. The creature began to bite the guard's neck. The guard tried to fight back by clawing at it, but he wasn't strong enough. He fought less and less, until finally, he stopped moving altogether. The creature's rampage wasn't over. There were still a few guards left, along with many of the scientists. It leapt onto a container and started searching for more targets. Cortez continued watching as the creature tore its way through its captors. It shredded every single person that it found into pieces, and then it continued its search. One of the scientists that was left ran to the surveillance room Cortez and Desmond stood in. He pounded on the door with his fists, all the while begging to be let in. Desmond reached for the door switch, but before he could open the door, the creature reached the scientist. It grabbed him by the back of his head and slammed his head into the reinforced glass. Blood began to run down the scientist's face from the top of his head, and now his broken nose. The creature slammed his head again, and this time, the scientist's head looked slightly sunken. It slammed it again, and this time, more of his blood and fleshy pulp began to stick onto the glass. It slammed his head again, and this time, almost half the scientist's face was sunken in. But it didn't stop. The creature continued to slam the glass with his head until there was nothing left of it. The creature dropped the remains on the floor. It began to claw at the reinforced glass, trying so desperately to finish what it started. Cortez walked to the door and activated the door's intercom. There is a button on the left side of the door. Push it to speak to us. What the hell are you doing? Desmond asked as the monster continued to claw its way to them. I need to talk to it. This is an opportune moment. Are you kidding me, Cortez? That thing isn't going to talk to us. It's just a mindless monster. The pounding suddenly stopped. The creature slowly guided its left hand to the intercom button and pressed it. There was a long pause as the creature seemed to compose itself.
Monster,
it asked slowly and casually. It began to chuckle, a harsh and low chuckle.
you think I'm a monster?
Cortez smiled. She looked at Desmond triumphantly, but he didn't seem to notice her. He was transfixed on the creature. What is that thing? He asked. The creature responded with a harsh laugh.
I am more than you can understand, little one. I am the plague.
Cortez hadn't expected the creature to be so self-aware. It already knew what it was, and what had made it. She wasn't sure what to make of it anymore. You are indeed the product of our experiments with my plague. The creature erupted in a roar of laughter. The sound caused her to flinch.
Your plague.
It asked to try to contain its laughter.
You think you are responsible for us?
Its laughter died down, and its posture became rigid.
You hope to experiment on us, contain us, control us, to use us for your goals. You are playing with something you cannot control. They will be the death of you.
Cortez had had enough. You think I'm afraid of you? She asked spitefully. You think I don't have something to sterilize a containment breach like you? You're just another failed experiment. I have to terminate now. Cortez, Desmond spoke softly. Look at the screens. She gave him a puzzled look and turned to the monitors. She froze in horror as a sudden realization struck her. There were now 5 open containers. The creature had intentionally made sure to damage the containers, and in doing so, freed 4 more creatures. 4 more monsters lurking around the facility. Terminate them! We can't let them escape! Desmond yelled. Right, Cortez rushed over to the control panel and began to work on the termination process. Normally, this process would have been instant, but she had almost completely disabled the procedure in her fear that someone would carelessly implement it in an unnecessary situation.
You're the one who wants to use the plague to strengthen humanity?
The creature addressed Desmond.
What a big heart you must have. I can't wait to see it for myself.
It erupted in laughter again. A chill ran down Cortez's spine when she heard two more sets of laughter in the distance join in. As she continued typing, two more creatures emerged from the distance. They smiled just as widely as the creature holding the intercom button smiled. She looked to the control panel and then back to the front. There were two more creatures walking towards them now. Cortez was beginning to panic. The glass should still hold against the strength of all five creatures, but she had a feeling that they had planned something. A feeling that they might be smarter and more independent than she had realized, and that her ambition to control them was doomed from the beginning. She looked on as a sixth and final creature began to walk towards the room. This one was taller and more muscular than the rest. Its hands weren't clawed like the rest of them, and it had chains wrapped around both of its arms. It wasn't smiling like the rest of its pack. Instead, it stared at us with an expression of revulsion and irritation. It stopped in the middle of the room, and it took in its surroundings. The revulsion on its face intensified as it examined the room. Its eyes finally rested on Cortez, and a look of interest flashed on its face. The creature sprinted towards the room. It collided with the wall, causing the whole room to vibrate. "Stop this!" Cortez ordered. "We made you what you are. You are strong because of us. I'm ordering you to stop." All except the sixth creature roared in laughter. The sixth creature struck the glass again.
We are not your creation.
It said between strikes.
We are plague walkers, and we only take orders from the one above.
Cortez watched as the glass began to crack. The whole room shook at the sheer strength of the lone plague walker. One final blow caused some of the glass to shatter. The monster forced its arm inside the room and struck Cortez's head. She fell backwards and collapsed on the floor. Cortez slowly opened her eyes. She instantly realized where she was. She was back in her lab. She surveyed the room and found Desmond lying on the table next to her. "Cortez," said a voice from a few feet away. It was Cortez's lab assistant. "What happened?" "There was a containment breach in your holding area." "I know that. What happened after I was knocked out?" "The creatures escaped into town. We have no way of tracking them, and they're out on the loose. What should we do?" "They escaped?" Cortez asked, amazed. She hadn't realized how clever the Plague Walkers had become. Failure or not, this augmented capabilities were far beyond what she had anticipated. They even kept their individuality while creating some odd version of a religion. A new thought entered her mind. If these are the results of the failures of the plague, then how strong are the successful ones? A smile spread across her face. She had the perfect plan to cultivate and observe the plague. She could watch it grow and develop while working on a way to implement all of the power it holds into her own body. "Dr. Cortez?" the lab assistant asked again. "What should we do?" "We need to keep an eye on everything that leaves the city. Set up a perimeter and make sure nothing infected leaves." "What about the escaped test subjects?" "They're right where they need to be. We don't have to do anything other than to keep them from leaving the city." Her assistant's eyes widened. "But what about the people in town?" "Our focus is the plague. And now that Desmond has given us the Alpha Project, we can find a way to cultivate the plague. The well-being of our subjects is nothing to be concerned about. Don't think of this place as a city anymore. Think of it as a petri dish." Cortez turned to face her assistant. Now, report to our superiors and tell them that the situation is under control. We need to make sure they don't try to shut down this project. Her assistant didn't move. He seemed unsure of what to do. He looked at Desmond and back to Cortez. You can't be serious. This is too dangerous for us to handle. If the plague were to get out of the perimeter, then there'll be no stopping it. Cortez stared at her assistant. This will happen, with or without your cooperation. But if you choose not to assist me, then you're as good to me as my previous assistant in his glass cage. She paused to let the weight of that sink in. Ask yourself if that's where you want to end up. No. His voice was shaky. She smiled. Try not to worry about the people outside. I'm sure many of them will be fine. There are only 6 escaped subjects. How much damage do you really think they can cause?